A 9-year-old girl with a prosthetic leg limped into a crowded coffee shop, turned away from every table she dared to approach. When she finally stopped in front of a quiet U.S. Marine and his canine dog, her voice trembled through the noise. "Can I sit here?" Everyone else had said no. What happened in the next few minutes would uncover a secret so dark it would change her life forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and unbreakable bonds. Your support truly means everything. Snow drifted sideways along Main Street, thin and relentless, turning Bozeman into a hushed gray corridor where sound felt muted, and every breath carried the bite of winter. Lena Harper pushed the coffee shop door open with both hands, using her shoulder for leverage, the way she'd learned to do since falling hurt too much to risk. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with narrow shoulders and a body that looked like it hadn't yet decided how to grow. Her brown hair was unevenly cut, strands brushing her cheeks and sticking out from beneath a faded pink knit hat. Her skin was pale with the faint bluish tint of cold that no amount of gloves ever seemed to fix. Her left leg ended below the knee, replaced by a prosthetic that was clearly too stiff and too short, forcing her into an awkward, painful rhythm with every step. Each movement made her jaw tighten. But she didn't cry. She never cried in public anymore. The Copper Hearth Cafe smelled of roasted beans and warm bread, the kind of place where locals lingered without checking the time. Exposed brick walls held framed photographs of Bozeman from decades ago, and the mismatched wooden tables bore the small scars of daily life. Coffee rings, knife marks, initials carved and forgotten. On most mornings, the cafe hummed with quiet conversation and the scrape of chairs. But today, as Lena stepped inside, the sound dipped. Not enough to be obvious, but enough for her to feel it. She scanned the room the way hunted animals do. Eyes flicking from face to face, measuring safety in half-seconds. She wasn't looking for kindness exactly. Kindness had disappointed her too many times. She was looking for permission, somewhere to sit, somewhere to rest the burning ache in her hip before it grew unbearable. She approached the first table where a middle-aged couple sat close together, steam rising from their mugs. Before Lena could speak, the woman's smile stiffened. Her hand slid protectively around her cup, and she shook her head once, polite but firm. No. The man didn't even look up. Lena nodded as if she'd expected it, her shoulders drooping just slightly, then turned away. At the second table, 2 college-aged men leaned over laptops, earbuds dangling around their necks. They noticed her immediately and then just as quickly pretended they hadn't. Their eyes glued themselves to screens as if ignoring her would make her disappear. Lena stood there for a second longer than she should have, then moved on, her prosthetic clicking softly against the floor. By the time she reached the third table, a woman with a stroller and a toddler eating crumbs, her good leg was trembling. The woman frowned openly this time, pulling her child closer. "Where are your parents?" she asked loud enough for others to hear. Not concern, suspicion. Lena's cheeks burned. She didn't answer. She simply turned and limped away, blinking fast. In the back corner of the cafe, half shadowed by a hanging industrial lamp, sat Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole. He was 38, tall even while seated with a solid compact build shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. His face was angular with a squared jaw dusted in short dark stubble that never quite grew into a beard. A thin scar ran from the edge of his right cheekbone down toward his jaw. Old, clean, the kind that came from shrapnel or shattered concrete. His hair was cut short in a regulation style, dark with strands of gray at the temples that made him look older than he was. His eyes were a steady steel gray, the kind that noticed exits, hands, and movement without appearing to stare. Daniel wore a heavy olive green jacket over a plain black shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed boots. Still carrying traces of Montana snow, he sat straight-backed out of habit, one hand wrapped loosely around a mug of black coffee that had long since gone untouched. In front of him lay a paperback novel he hadn't Turned a page of in 10 minutes. At his feet lay Rex. Rex was a 4-year-old German shepherd, large but lean, with a thick amber and black coat that caught the light when he moved. His ears stood erect, alert without aggression, and his dark eyes tracked the room with quiet intelligence. Trained as a military working dog, Rex had the stillness of something that knew exactly when to act and when not to. His posture was relaxed, but his awareness never dimmed. He lay partly beneath the table, positioned so his body formed a subtle barrier between Daniel and the rest of the cafe. Daniel noticed Lena the moment she entered. He didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. He saw the way she walked. The way her weight shifted unnaturally, the micro pauses between steps that signaled pain. He saw the adult stiffen as she approached them. Saw the familiar pattern of discomfort and avoidance. It was a pattern he'd seen before in refugee camps overseas, in hospital corridors back home. People didn't like mirrors that reminded them of suffering they couldn't fix. When Lena reached his table, she stopped so close that Daniel could see the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek and the way her fingers curled inward as if she were bracing herself. She said. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the ambient noise of the cafe. She cleared her throat and tried again. Can I sit here? Her eyes flicked briefly to Rex, then back to Daniel. There was fear there, but also something else. Hope she didn't fully trust. Daniel didn't hesitate. He nudged the chair across from him backward with the toe of his boot. The scrape echoed louder than it should have. Yeah, he said simply. You can sit. Lena froze for half a second as if waiting for the word to be taken back. Then she moved. As she turned toward the chair, her prosthetic caught slightly on the uneven floor. Her balance wobbled. She pitched forward. Daniel was on his feet before the chair finished sliding. He caught her gently, one hand steadying her shoulder, the other bracing her elbow. His grip was firm but careful. The way you touch something fragile without making it feel weak. You've got it, he said quietly. Rex rose immediately, stepping closer but not crowding. His body angled protectively, his ears lowered slightly, his head dipping in a calming gesture. He sniffed once, then sat beside the chair, solid and warm. Lena's breath came out in a shaky exhale. She nodded, embarrassed, and eased herself into the seat. As she did, the sleeve of her oversized jacket slid up her arm. Daniel saw the bruises. They were old and new, layered together, yellow fading into purple, fingerprints clearly defined around her forearm and upper arm. Adult hands gripping hard, too hard. Something cold settled in Daniel's chest. He returned to his seat slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Years in uniform had taught him that reactions could escalate situations before you were ready. But inside, something sharpened, focused the way it always did when he recognized a threat. Rex noticed the shift instantly, his gaze lifted to Daniel's face, then back to Lena, his posture tightening by a fraction. What's your name? Daniel asked, lowering his voice. Lena, she said after a pause, she added. Lena Harper, you hungry, Lena? She hesitated, then nodded once, small and careful. Daniel signaled the barista, a young woman named Sarah with chestnut brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, freckles dusting her nose, and tired eyes softened by kindness. She was in her late 20s, slim with the easy movements of someone used to long shifts on her feet. She glanced at Lena, then back at Daniel, and read enough in his face not to ask questions. Sandwich, Daniel said. Chips, hot chocolate. Sarah nodded. Coming right up. When the food arrived, Lena stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. Her hands hovered uncertainly above the table. It's yours, Daniel said. Take your time. She ate slowly, methodically, not like a child enjoying a treat, but like someone conserving resources. Every few bites, her eyes lifted. To Daniel, checking that he was still there. Rex rested his chin lightly on the edge of the table, watching her with calm attention. Outside, the snow kept falling, thickening the world beyond the cafe windows. And for the first time in days, Lena felt the ache in her leg fade into the background, replaced by something unfamiliar and fragile. Safety. But even as she sipped the hot chocolate, her fingers shaking slightly, Daniel knew this moment, this quiet table in a warm cafe, was only the beginning. Whatever had chased this girl into the snow, had not simply let her go, and he had a feeling it wouldn't stay buried for long. The cafe grew quieter as the morning edged toward noon, the rush thinning into a slow rhythm of clinking cups and murmured conversations. And it was in that lull that Daniel Cole began to see what Lena Harper had been trying so hard to hide. She ate carefully, methodically, her small hands steadying the sandwich as if precision mattered more than hunger. Yet every movement tugged her sleeve back just enough for the bruises to surface again. They were not dramatic at first glance, not the kind that demanded attention, but Daniel had learned long ago that real damage rarely announced itself loudly. These marks told a story written over time. Older yellowed bruises fading into sickly green. Newer ones, deep purple and blue, layered in a way that spoke of repetition rather than accident. He watched her without staring, his expression calm, his posture unchanged. But inside his mind, the same instincts that once kept men alive in hostile territory were now narrowing in on a single fragile truth. Rex shifted closer to Lena's chair, his large frame settling into a protective curve beside her leg. The German shepherd's coat caught the light from the window, amber strands gleaming against darker markings, his chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm. At 4 years old, Rex had already lived a life most dogs never would. Trained on military bases, flown overseas, conditioned to detect threat before it spoke. He did not whine or paw or crowd. Instead, he angled his body so that Lena was always within reach, his ears adjusting to every sound around them. When a chair scraped too loudly nearby, his head lifted. When a man laughed too sharply at the counter, his eyes tracked the movement. He did not growl, but Lena felt the quiet reassurance of something solid staying between her and the world. Daniel took a sip of his now cold coffee, buying time. He had learned through years of dealing with frightened civilians and shell-shocked recruits that questions had to come gently in the right order or not at all. "Does that leg hurt you much?" he asked, nodding subtly toward her prosthetic, his tone neutral, almost casual. Lena stiffened, then shrugged, a small motion that pulled at her shoulders. "Sometimes," she said. "Most of the time." She glanced down at her cup of hot chocolate, swirling the marshmallows with her spoon. "It's too tight, I think. But my aunt says, I just need to get used to it." The word "aunt" landed heavily. Daniel didn't comment, but something tightened behind his eyes. "Where is she now?" he asked. "At home," Lena replied. Her voice flattened, losing what little softness it had held moments before. "She doesn't like it when I'm gone long." Rex's ears lowered a fraction, not in fear, but in recognition. Daniel noticed. He leaned back slightly, lowering himself to Lena's eye level. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said. "But if something's wrong, you won't be in trouble for saying it." Lena's fingers clenched around the mug. For a moment, Daniel thought she would retreat, pull the walls back up. Then her shoulders sagged just a little, as if holding herself together had finally grown too heavy. "My parents died," she said quietly. "Last year, there was a crash on Highway 191. Everyone says it was fast. They say they didn't feel anything." She swallowed. "After that, I went to live with my aunt, Carol. Carol Mitchell." The name would surface later, but even now it seemed to hang in the air like a bruise itself. Lena described her aunt in pieces rather than full sentences, the way children do when they don't yet understand that patterns matter. Carol was tall and sharp-edged with thin lips that pressed together when she was angry, which was often. Her hair was a brittle blonde, always pulled back tightly, her skin pale and stretched, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and stale perfume. She moved through the house like everything in it annoyed her, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that made Lena's stomach knot even before words were spoken. Daniel listened without interruption, his jaw slowly tightening. "She says I cost too much," Lena continued, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "Food, doctor visits, the leg." Her eyes flicked up to Daniel. "She says my parents' money is already gone. That I should be grateful she even keeps me." Daniel felt a familiar anger stir, one he kept carefully leashed. "And the bruises?" he asked softly. Lena hesitated, then rolled her sleeve higher herself, exposing more of the damage. "She gets mad when I'm slow," she whispered. "Or when I spill things, or when I ask questions," her breath hitched. "Sometimes she grabs me hard." Rex let out a low, almost inaudible huff, not a growl, but a sound of warning. And Daniel placed a hand on the dog's neck, grounding both of them. He nodded slowly. "How did you lose your leg?" he asked, already knowing the answer would hurt. Lena's eyes dropped to the floor. "She says it was an accident," she murmured. "We were in the garage. She was backing out the car. I was behind it trying to pick something up. She didn't stop." Her voice cracked. "She saw me." The cafe seemed to fade at the edges, the warmth dimming, replaced by something colder and sharper. Daniel had seen vehicular injuries before, had read after-action reports where accidents were blamed for things that were anything but. He leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. "Did anyone ever ask you what happened?" he said. Lena shook her head. "She told the doctors. She told the police. She said, I ran behind the car." A tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed by her until it reached her chin. "I didn't." Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. He thought of the nights overseas when he'd had to decide whether to act on incomplete information when waiting meant someone died. This was different, but the weight of responsibility felt eerily familiar. "Lena," he said, his tone steady but firm. "Has she ever talked about money in front of you?" Lena nodded. "I heard her on the phone last week. She said if something happened to me, she'd finally be free, that everything would be hers." Her hands began to shake. "I ran away after that. I was scared." Rex pressed his body closer to her knee, warmth seeping through the fabric of her leggings, and Lena leaned into him without realizing she'd done it. Daniel stood slowly, careful not to startle her. He looked toward the counter where Sarah, the barista, wiped down the espresso machine. Up close, Sarah was petite, no taller than 5 feet 4 inches, her frame slim, but sturdy from years of lifting trays and standing on hard floors. Her brown eyes missed little, and when Daniel met her gaze, she read the tension immediately. "Sarah," Daniel said quietly when she approached. "Could you sit with her for a minute?" Sarah nodded without hesitation, pulling a chair over. She smiled gently at Lena, her freckles deepening as she did. "Hey, sweetheart," she said. "You like marshmallows? I can get you more." Lena managed a small nod. Daniel stepped a few feet away, pulling his phone from his jacket pocket. His thumb hovered over a contact he hadn't used in months. The man on the other end had once been his platoon sergeant, a former military police officer named Aaron Pike. Pike was in his mid-40s now, broad-shouldered with a thick dark beard shot through with gray, his voice growly from years of shouting over engines and gunfire. More importantly, Pike understood systems, how they failed, and how to push them when they did. When Pike answered, Daniel spoke low and fast, outlining only what mattered. "Child. Bruises, prosthetic injury, threats." Pike didn't interrupt. When Daniel finished, there was a pause, then a single sentence. "Don't let her go back." Daniel returned to the table, kneeling, so he was level with Lena again. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. "You're not in trouble, but I need you to stay with me for a bit, okay?" Lena searched his face, fear and something like relief battling in her eyes. "She'll be mad," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. She won't touch you again. I promise. Outside, the snow continued to fall over Gallatin County, covering roads and rooftops alike, hiding tracks, muffling sound. Inside the cafe, a quiet shift had occurred, unseen by most. What had begun as a simple request for a place to sit had become something far more dangerous and far more important. Daniel knew that once he stepped forward, there was no turning back. Systems would be challenged. People would push back. But as Rex rested his chin on Lena's knee and Lena's trembling slowly eased, Daniel understood something else just as clearly. This was no longer a choice. It was an obligation. And whatever waited beyond that cafe door was about to be forced into the light. Snow had thinned into a fine, steady drift by the time Daniel Cole guided Lena out of the cafe, the cold air sharpening every sound as the door closed behind them. Helena lay an hour north by road, its courthouse and agencies better equipped for what Daniel knew was coming. And the decision to move was not impulsive. It was deliberate, shaped by years of learning when to stay still and when to relocate before danger caught up. Lena walked beside him with Rex on her other side. The dog's pace slowed to match her uneven steps, his shoulder brushing her leg whenever the sidewalk dipped. Daniel carried no bag, no visible urgency, only a quiet certainty that this was the moment lines were drawn. They drove in Daniel's old pickup, the heater humming steadily, frost receding from the windshield as the miles passed. Lena watched the landscape with a guarded curiosity, chin tucked into the collar of a borrowed scarf Sarah had wrapped around her before they left. She did not ask where they were going. She had learned not to ask questions that might invite anger. Daniel noticed the habit and filed it away with the others. Small telling details that would matter later. Rex rode in the back seat, harness clipped, head lifted between the front seats so he could keep Lena in view. When the truck hit a rough patch of road and Lena winced, Rex leaned forward, resting his chin near her knee, grounding her without making a sound. Daniel's phone vibrated once, then again. He ignored it until they crossed the county line, then pulled into a quiet turnout and answered. Aaron Pike's voice came through low and controlled, the cadence of a man who had learned to speak precisely because imprecision got people hurt. Pike was 46 now, broad and compact, with a permanent squint from too many bright days on ranges and roads. His beard was trimmed close, peppered with gray, and he wore his past like a tool rather than a wound. Years earlier, a roadside bomb had flipped his vehicle and taken the hearing in one ear. It had also stripped him of illusions about institutions saving people on their own. "I've got 2 hours," Pike said, "and a checklist." Daniel gave him the location. "We're heading to Helena. I need this done clean." "It will be," Pike replied. "Who else knows?" Daniel named 2 former Marines from his unit. Men who had learned to document before they acted, to verify before they accused. One, Lucas Herrera, was lean and hawk-nosed. His dark hair kept longer now that he was out. His temperament patient to the point of stubbornness. He had left the Corps after losing a younger cousin to a system that moved too slowly. The other, Ben O'Neill, was broader, red-bearded, with a calm that settled rooms. He had a habit of listening longer than anyone else. A trait honed after an early mistake had cost him a friend. They were already on their way. In Helena, Daniel chose a motel that advertised nothing and delivered less. Clean rooms, indifferent staff, anonymity. He paid cash. Lena stood close to Rex as they waited, her eyes tracking every movement in the lobby, her shoulders tight. The clerk barely looked up. Daniel signed a name that wasn't his, a habit he'd hoped to forget, then led them down a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and coffee. The room was small but warm. Daniel set Lena on the bed and knelt to adjust her prosthetic, loosening the straps just enough to ease the pressure. He asked permission before touching, explained every step. She watched his hands with solemn focus, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Rex lay across the doorway, not blocking it, simply occupying the threshold as if it were his post. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said after a while. Anything. Daniel replied. If I go back, she said, choosing her words carefully, will she be nicer? Daniel didn't lie. He also didn't answer the question she was really asking. You're not going back, he said gently. Not today. Not alone. The knock came in the early evening. Pike entered first, scanning the room, his posture relaxed but alert. Behind him, Herrera and O'Neill followed, shedding coats damp with melting snow. Introductions were brief. Pike crouched to Lena's level, his movements deliberate. I'm Aaron, he said. I help kids when grown-ups mess up. Lena studied him, then nodded once. Okay. They got to work without ceremony. Pike laid out a legal pad and began a timeline, dates and times anchored to facts rather than feelings. Herrera called up public records on a battered laptop, fingers moving fast, eyes sharper than his calm suggested. O'Neill made tea from the motel's sad kettle and handed Lena a cup, sitting across from her with his hands folded, letting silence do its job. Daniel stayed close, anchoring the space. Lena spoke in fragments at first, then longer stretches as the men listened without interruption. She described the house, the locked pantry, the way meals were measured and withheld. She described Carol's moods, the sound of heels in the hallway, the car in the garage, the look on her aunt's face just before the impact. Pike asked clarifying questions when necessary, never pressing when Lena faltered. When Lena mentioned the insurance money again, how she had overheard phone calls, how words like beneficiary and free had floated through rooms like threats. Herrera pulled up probate filings. The numbers aligned too neatly to be coincidence. Rex shifted positions as the room's energy tightened, his presence steadying. When Lena's voice shook, he inched closer until her fingers found his fur. Daniel watched the dog and the child mirror each other's breathing, both slowing. They split tasks. Pike would contact a trusted investigator in Helena, someone who still believed in paper trails and urgency. Herrera would canvass neighbors discreetly, starting with those closest to the house, asking about patterns rather than accusations. O'Neill would document Lena's injuries with photos and notes, precise and unemotional, the way courts preferred. Daniel would stay with Lena. Before they moved, Daniel knelt in front of her again. I need you to hear this, he said. What we're doing is about keeping you safe. It might get uncomfortable. People may ask questions. You can stop at any time. Lena looked at Rex, then back at Daniel. You won't leave, she asked. Daniel's answer came without hesitation. I'm here. I'm not walking away. Night settled over Helena, lights blurring into halos beyond the motel window. Herrera returned first, cheeks flushed from the cold. Neighbors notice things, he said quietly, yelling. A kid not seen outside for months. One called to CPS last spring. Closed with no follow-up. Pike's jaw tightened. Patterns, he said. They matter. O'Neill finished his notes, setting the camera down with care. The prosthetic fit is wrong, he added. Pressure source. That's medical negligence at best. They regrouped, the plan tightening. Pike made his call. The investigator would meet them at Children's Medical Center the next morning. Not CPS intake, a person with authority. Later, when the others stepped out to coordinate logistics, Daniel stayed with Lena. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting open on his knees, a posture that asked nothing. It's okay to sleep, he said. Rex will be right there. Lena lay down fully clothed, exhaustion overtaking fear. Rex curled along the bed's edge, a living barrier. Daniel dimmed the lights and stood by the window, watching snow erase footprints in the parking lot. He understood the weight of what he promised. Promises changed lives. They also demanded payment, time, resolve, consequences. As Lena's breathing evened out, Daniel felt the familiar pull of duty settle into his bones, heavier and clearer than anything he'd felt in years. Whatever came next would test every system meant to protect a child. He was ready and he would not walk away. Morning broke hard and white over Great Falls. The Missouri River wrapped in mist as sirens stitched the quiet into something sharp and inevitable. Daniel Cole stood in the hospital parking lot with Lena Harper's small hand tucked into the pocket of his jacket. Rex seated at her other side like a shadow that breathed. The decision to move fast had been made the night before, but speed did not mean chaos. It meant sequence. Phone calls had landed where they needed to land, and by the time the sun reached the courthouse steps, people with authority were already in motion. Detective Mara Clean arrived first. She was in her early 40s, tall and spare, with ash-brown hair cut just below her jaw and eyes the color of slate after rain. Years in major crimes had etched patience into her face, the kind that looked calm, even when it wasn't. She wore a wool coat over a suit that fit like it had been tailored for long days and longer nights, and her voice carried a steadiness born of having seen. What happens when adults look away? A decade earlier, a missed report had ended badly for a child in her district. She carried that memory like a compass needle that never stopped pointing north. Beside her stood Claire Monahan from Child Protective Services, younger, softer at first glance, with auburn hair braided down her back and freckles scattered across a pale face. Claire's shoulders were narrow, her posture attentive, and she moved with a gentleness that came from choosing the work rather than falling into it. She knelt to Lena's height immediately, careful to keep her hands visible. "I'm here to help," she said simply. Lena nodded once, trusting Daniel's stillness more than the words. They drove together to the house on the edge of town, a low bay structure that blended into its street like it wanted to be forgotten. Daniel remained in the car with Lena and Rex while the warrant was executed. He watched through the windshield as officers approached with measured steps, Klein's hand rising in a quiet signal. The door opened. The house swallowed them. Inside, the truth unfolded in rooms that smelled of old carpet and stale air. The first officer's radio crackled once, then went quiet. Klein moved through the living room past framed photos of smiling adults at barbecues. The performance of normally carefully curated. The kitchen told a different story. The pantry door bore a small brass padlock polished from use. On the refrigerator hung a laminated chart in neat block handwriting, dates, ounces, check marks, empty squares, meals recorded like data points, days circled in red where nothing but water had been allowed. Klein closed her eyes for a beat, then photographed everything. The hallway narrowed toward a door at the end. A lock had been installed on the outside, the kind used for sheds. Inside the room was barely a room at all. More storage than shelter. A thin mattress lay on the floor. No frame, no sheets. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, its switch outside the door. In the corner sat a cardboard box holding 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, socks mismatched and worn thin. No toys, no books. The air felt heavy, damp with neglect. "Jesus," one officer murmured, then caught himself. Clean said nothing. She didn't have to. The evidence spoke with a clarity that made arguments unnecessary. Carol Mitchell was found in the garage, her blonde hair pulled tight, her face pinched with irritation that flickered into confusion when she saw the badges. She was in her late 30s, tall and angular, her movements sharp as if the world owed her something it hadn't delivered. When they read her rights, she protested with practiced indignation, her voice slipping into the concerned Guardian register that had likely worked before. It didn't work now. The handcuffs closed. The garage echoed. Back at the hospital, Lena waited with Daniel in a small exam room painted a too cheerful blue. Rex lay at her feet, head up, watching the door. When Dr. Samuel Ortiz entered, he did so with quiet respect for the space. Ortiz was in his early 50s, medium height with salt and pepper hair and a face softened by years of pediatrics. His hands were steady, his eyes kind but precise. He asked permission before every touch, explaining what he was doing, why it mattered. The exam took time. Bruises were catalogued, measured, dated. Pressure sores around the prosthetic were documented. The fit clearly wrong, the skin angry and infected. Ortiz's jaw tightened when he saw the device itself. 2 sizes too small, he said quietly. This would hurt anyone. For a child, it's cruel. He spoke of options, proper fitting, physical therapy, pain management, as if listing normal steps, and in doing so made them feel possible. When Lena flinched, Rex shifted closer. Ortiz noticed and smiled faintly. He's doing a good job, he said. Daniel nodded, hand resting briefly on the dog's collar. Down the hall, Clean and Monahan met with Pike and the team. Herrera had already delivered neighbors' statements, raised voices heard late at night, a child never seen. Outside, a call to CPS months ago that had gone nowhere. O'Neill handed over photographs and notes. Clinical and devastating. The insurance documents arrived next, pulled from a locked drawer in Carol's home office. Policies, beneficiaries, transfers, clean on paper, ugly in implication. A spreadsheet outlined debts before the accident and projections after. At the bottom, a line read simply, when resolved. Clean closed the folder. This isn't negligence, she said. This is intent. By evening, Carol Mitchell sat in an interview room, her confidence unraveling. She denied, deflected, reframed. The evidence didn't care. Clean laid it out piece by piece, never raising her voice, never rushing. When Carol's mask finally slipped, it did so in a way that left no doubt. Charges were filed. The door closed. In the pediatric ward, Lena slept at last. Exhaustion claiming her in a way fear had delayed. Daniel sat in the chair beside her bed, unmoving even as hours passed and his back protested. Rex lay along the side rail, chin resting near Lena's hand. When she stirred and murmured, Daniel was there, voice low and steady. You're safe, he said. I am here. Claire Monahan returned quietly, a folder tucked under her arm. She spoke to Daniel in the hallway outlining next steps with care, temporary placement, court timelines, support services. She did not promise miracles. She promised presence. Daniel listened, asking only what he needed to ask. By the time dawn crept back through the blinds, the truth had settled into place like something heavy finally set down. The house was sealed. The case was moving. Lena's care plan was underway. None of it erased what had happened. All of it changed what could happen next. Daniel returned to the room and watched Lena sleep. Her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. Rex lifted his head, eyes meeting Daniel's. There would be hearings. There would be resistance. There would be people who wanted to make this smaller than it was. Daniel knew the cost of standing firm. He stayed anyway. Spring arrived in Missoula without asking permission, melting the last stubborn seams of winter along the Clark Fork River and softening the mountains into something almost forgiving. The courthouse stood solid and pale against the blue sky, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of decisions that changed lives quietly, one at a time. Daniel Cole walked those steps with measured calm. Lena Harper's small hand tucked into his, Rex moving at their side with the patient focus of a dog who understood when the moment mattered. Lena had grown in the months since Great Falls. Not taller exactly, but steadier. Her new prosthetic fit properly now, the molded socket aligned to her frame. The mechanics adjusted so her gait no longer pulled pain through her hips. Physical therapy had strengthened muscles that had been guarding themselves for too long. She still tired easily, still paused when the world grew loud, but her shoulders no longer curved inward as if bracing for impact. Her hair had been trimmed neatly, dark brown and glossy in the spring light, and her skin carried a healthier warmth. She wore a simple blue dress that fell to her knees and sneakers chosen for stability rather than hiding. She did not look unbroken. She looked becoming. Daniel wore a pressed shirt and jacket that felt unfamiliar after years of uniforms and field jackets. The scar along his jaw caught the light when he turned his head, a reminder of a life shaped by consequence. He had learned to live with responsibility early, had learned even earlier that walking away cost more than staying. Those lessons sat quietly in his posture now, in the way he stood between Lena and open spaces without making it obvious. In the way he let her lead when she wanted to and stepped in only when asked. Rex had been brushed until his amber and black coat shone. His harness fitted neatly across his chest. At 4 years old, he moved with the confidence of a working dog who had found his place again. The hospital smells, the waiting rooms, the nights of quiet vigilance had not dulled him. They had refined him. He stayed close to Lena but never crowded her, his pace matching hers with instinctive precision. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Chen sat with composed attentiveness, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, her glasses perched low as she reviewed the file. She was in her late 50s, slight of build with a voice that carried without sharpness. Years on the bench had taught her the difference between words spoken for effect and those that came from truth. She looked at Lena, not as a case number, but as a child who deserved to be seen. "Lena," Judge Chen said gently, leaning forward. "You've heard everyone today. You know what this means. Where do you feel safest?" The room held its breath. Daniel felt Lena's fingers tighten around his, not in fear, but resolve. She looked up at him once, searching his face the way she always did before trusting the ground beneath her feet. Then she turned back to the judge. "With him," she said, her voice clear. "And Rex?" Judge Chen smiled. A small curve of relief that did not compromise her authority. "Mr. Cole," she said, "this isn't temporary. This is responsibility. Do you understand that?" Daniel met her gaze. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand. And you want it?" "I do." The gavel came down softly. The words that followed were procedural, but their weight landed anyway. Guardianship granted, permanence acknowledged. When the hearing concluded, Lena exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for years. They stepped back into the sunlight, the courthouse doors closing behind them on a chapter that would not be reopened. Outside, Claire Monahan waited with a quiet smile, her auburn braid resting over one shoulder. She had changed too over the months. Lines of concern easing as progress replaced uncertainty. She handed Daniel a folder. Schedules, contacts, next steps, then knelt to Lena's height. "You did great," she said. Lena nodded, then surprised everyone by hugging her. Claire laughed softly, eyes bright. Life settled into routines that were new and unfamiliar, but welcome. Daniel's house on the edge of town was modest. A singlestory place with a yard that backed into open space. He let Lena choose her room. She picked the one with the morning light. They painted the walls together. Rex supervising from the doorway. Tail-thumping approval. Daniel learned how to pack lunches that didn't feel like obligations. Learned the rhythm of school drop-offs and therapy appointments. Learned that silence could be comfortable when it wasn't enforced. Neighbors noticed, some were curious, some cautious. Daniel remained polite, reserved, his reputation growing quietly through consistency rather than explanation. Lena made a friend at school, a girl named Ava, with a gap to smile and a habit of talking with her hands. Ava's mother, Denise, was tall and athletic, her blonde hair cut short for convenience, her demeanor open and practical. She asked questions without prying, offered help without hovering. Lena accepted both. On warm afternoons, Daniel took them to the park near the river. Rex trotted alongside Lena as she practiced walking without looking down, his pace slow and steady. When she stumbled, he adjusted. When she laughed, he wagged, a full-bodied joy that seemed to echo across the grass. Daniel stood back, hands in his pockets, watching the two of them find their rhythm. He felt something ease in his chest, something he hadn't realized had been clenched for years. There were nights when Lena woke from bad dreams. Her breath quick, her hands searching. Daniel learned the cadence of reassurance. The words that worked, the ones that didn't. Rex learned it, too, lifting his head before the first sound escaped her. Together, they waited out the storms that no one else could see. On Lena's 10th birthday, they kept it simple. A cake with blue frosting, a few presents. Ava and Denise came. Claire stopped by. Rex wore a bandana. He promptly tried to remove. When Lena closed her eyes to make a wish, Daniel watched her face, wondering what a child who had learned to expect nothing would dare to ask for now. "I already have it," she said when asked. Later, as evening cooled the air, Daniel and Lena walked the path behind the house. The mountains caught the last light, turning gold, then purple. Lena practiced walking without the cane. Rex pacing her, his shoulder aligned with her hip. Daniel followed a few steps back, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to let her try. She didn't fall. She took one step, then another, her laughter ringing clear and unafraid. Rex slowed, matched her, glanced back at Daniel as if to say, "See." Daniel smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. They stopped at the fence line where the land opened wide. Lena leaned against Rex, scratching behind his ears. Daniel stood. Behind them, the weight of responsibility settling into something like purpose. They weren't running anymore. They were home. Sometimes the miracles we pray for don't arrive as thunder or light from the sky. They come quietly, wearing the shape of ordinary people who choose not to look away. God works through hands that stay when leaving would be easier. Through hearts that listen when silence would be safer. Through love that shows up again and again without asking for applause. In everyday life, we pass moments like this more often than we realize. A child needing protection, a stranger needing courage, a choice that seems small but carries eternal weight. Faith is not only found in churches or prayers spoken aloud. It lives in the decisions we make when no one is watching. When doing the right thing costs us something. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what this story made you feel. And if you believe even a little in quiet miracles and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so these stories can continue reaching those who need them. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you in your daily life. May He place the right people in your path.